Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
Let's start with Exhibit C, as we always do. I think this supply and demand for oil is unlikely to change based on current or future events. And the reason for that is that despite the flare-up in Hormuz, with drones going into 3 ships, including 1 LNG ship, I don't think that traffic going through Hormuz will be substantially diminished. I think the price of oil will trade somewhat higher, maybe closer to the high 70s and the high 60s. But what you see here is a reduction in supply of crude of really not that much, 2.5 million barrels or so. And I think these numbers will all pretty well be supported by actual numbers. In terms of demand, everyone's remarked on China's imports being less, and China's demand has been kind of flattish. And in this table, it's lower, a little lower. In fact, everyone's kind of flattish or a little lower. So demand doesn't grow. It comes off by about 800,000 barrels. And the combination is that you have a world inventory draw of around, of some, but not a lot. And the last table on the page, you can see U.S. inventory is down, but it's not impossibly down at any particular time, including a strategic oil reserve. We have about a billion barrels. And so we're down, 50 million barrels or something like that. It's not terrible. And the products there, gasoline and jet and distillate, are all down a little, but it's all manageable. So despite all the prognostications that oil would go to 150 or gasoline would go to $6 or whatnot, the industry's been remarkably resilient. And the pricing in Exhibit B at the bottom is from last Thursday. This Thursday, it'll be higher. I think that the 27 price of 66 will come up by a couple of bucks a barrel. I think there's a typo here. I don't think that's 61. I think that's 71 on the near price, but the backwardation will just be more rather than shrink. Natural gas is kind of holding its own. It still looks as though we're going to wind up with 3 years flat, in the 350 range. That was the average for 25. That's going to be about the average for 26, and that's going to be about the average for 27. There were some statistics released today in Platts that pretty much supports the idea that power demand, natural gas for power demand, is going to be flat, 26 versus 25. In this table, it's up a little. What's happened is, as time goes on, more and more renewables come on, and they take market share. And then, of course, the Trump administration and regulators in general have been reluctant to have coal capacity retired, because as the renewables come on, that does give you more supply, but it's not dispatchable supply, meaning it's not available 24 hours a day. So even regulators who believe in global warming are a little reluctant to have coal capacity come off. To get to Exhibit A, the deficit hopefully will flatten out. Hopefully these numbers are still good. You can see defense is up in fiscal 27. Part of that is the war. Part of that is request for more money. Interest hopefully is flat. That's going to depend. The average interest rate the last year on the debt held by the public was around 3.5%. I think that's going to be the average interest rate this year, and hopefully stays in that range. The only place to really have some significant expense savings is in Medicare and Medicaid. Between them, they're about just under $2 trillion of spending out of our $7 trillion of spending. Some rationalization there would be terrific. I personally think that if we had some type of a crisis such as we had in '08 and '09 with the mortgage markets completely disintegrating, the way residential mortgages were financed, and we had to have something like federal intervention, like we had then, to go to the rescue of banks and other counterparties, I think the best place to focus would be a bipartisan move towards Medicare-for-All, try to rationalize the Medicaid system, which is 50-50 with the states, but it's one man's opinion, and we'll have to see if something like that happens. With that, I think we've only used 8 minutes or so. I think before we get into analyzing predictions, we'll finish at the end with healthcare news, but I think we just ought to go over tech news. Turning to page 1, there continues to be news, but citing across Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, Tesla, SpaceX, nothing notable, I don't think, in the last 7 days. But how does it look to you, Mike?
Let's see what's new in the last couple of days. Today, SpaceX launched another AI model. It is called Grok 4.5. They claim that it has Claude Opus 4.7 capabilities, but is much faster and much cheaper. Like I say, I've actually played with it this morning a little bit, and it seems to work fine. The big difference between it and Opus 4.7 or 4.8 for that matter is the size of the context window. It is only 500,000 tokens. So it's, for some things, it'll be less usable, but it's a step in the right direction for them. What else do we have? I don't really have any big announcements on any of the other companies. Do you, Jason?
No. I mean, the news this week, it seems to me, in the tech sector is Hynix, a Korean company, coming in, financing itself in the U.S. equity market to the tune of $25 billion. It's complementary. I guess it shows that the U.S. equity market is still the place in the world where you can raise money. But it also is a little alarming given the past behavior of member companies. I mean, if you fit them with a lot of extra equity financing, for sure, if the past is any indication, they'll overbuild. Maybe it's different this time, but that certainly is the history of Samsung, Hynix.
We'll find out more. I think the date I have here is July 10th. That's their listing date. So we'll find out more on Friday.
Any other news in the first few pages, Jason?
I guess some interesting news that I'd read was out of IBM, where they have produced a 7 angstrom chip. So this is 0.7 nanometers. If you're doing the nanometer math, the size of the actual components on the chips are no longer shrinking, but they're doing the math based on the density of transistors they can pack onto a square inch, I guess. So this is one of the most advanced chips out there, where compared to TSMC, they're currently on 2 nanometer and planning to go to a 1.6 nanometer density next year. So IBM's research, at least, is pretty far ahead, which is interesting. But
just before we get into the predictions, what about the announcement of a joint venture to present open source capability? Nvidia, Palantir, I guess, offering it first to the government, but possibly also to banks or other large users. Is that going to be news a month from now or 2 months from now, or is that just a Palantir press release?
I think it's real. I think that's where the industry goes. As still believe that the models themselves are a commodity. They're, the advanced research labs are pushing the frontier of a language model, but the rest of the world is just, specifically China, but other companies are just distilling those models after the fact and releasing nearly as equal capability open source, so essentially free, if you just pay for the hosting yourself. And I think that's at some point in the future, I can't believe that these models don't get to a point where there's diminishing returns, they can't be made any better, and then the open source community is right there behind them. And then what's the value of the model itself? So I think it is the future of how we're hosting these things. And are we at to a point already where these models are good enough? Like, do we need Fable 5 versus Anthropic's Opus, Opus 4.8 currently?
The other thing that kind of came up in the past week related to Palantir is Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir, had an interview on CNBC where he, as is quoted, went unhinged or had a meltdown, depending on who the reporting was done by. But he's a very interesting guy, and this interview is very emblematic of Alex Karp. He challenged the AI labs, meaning Anthropic, but also OpenAI, in that corporations don't really want to give the keys to the kingdom over to them. They don't want Anthropic to be using their data to train their models. Then the question is, if you're an enterprise, how should you be architecting your data? And even the way that we've done it is set up so that our system can be plugged into with any AI agent. So if for some reason Anthropic goes down, we could go use ChatGPT Codex, or we could use an open source model. That wasn't the intention from the outset, but also, the mission criticality of a Fortune 500 company putting all their eggs into one basket, they have to feel very comfortable with that. And Karp is basically saying that these OpenAI and Anthropic have done a poor job of earning the trust of their customers. So the counter to that is having a system that's capable of aggregating the data in what Palantir does is a context graph, essentially, and making that data available to models so that you could plug models in and out. So there's two pieces here. Karp is trying to sell essentially Palantir as this integration layer for the enterprise, but also be able to serve a custom model to their customers through the partnership with Nvidia. And I think Nvidia will become more aggressive with their support of open source, the more the model labs move towards using other people's chips. And I think that's just a natural power dynamic within the industry.
All right. Well, we can't chew into any more of the half hour. We've got to turn it over to Jason and the predictions where we're all going to be embarrassed. So over to you, Jason.
Oh, should we start with energy then?
Sure.
The first prediction already came to fruition, is that the U.S. gas supply would exceed 108 billion cubic feet a day. So next one is NRC issues 2 Gen 4 construction permits. So new nuclear reactors, and our analysis says that's leaning towards yes, I guess. So they've permitted some that were small modular reactors, one traditional size and some SMRs.
Yeah, the construction permit issued was for TerraPower in Wyoming. So it'll be a 345 megawatt. There's a list of quite a few other ones that are potential hits for this year. X Energy, which is a partnership with Dow, is expected near the end of the year. And then TVA also be one. So that seems to be tracking.
I think, and then the next one's a Mike prediction that natural gas hits between $4.50 and $5. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not looking very good. Yeah. I believe at the beginning of the year, didn't we actually get a spike in the beginning of the year that they got up there.
I could look at it for a couple of months.
Yeah,
Kind of fell
yeah.
on.
Yeah, it's not looking great
you
now.
look like a genius for about 2 or 3 months.
Mine was China oil demand resumes growth, which did happen for the first 2 months of the year until the war in Iran, and they extremely cut down their use of imported oil.
Yeah, well, they have a large petroleum reserve, so presumably they'll have to fill that back up. And your back half of the year may look better.
I also predicted that a private company would have ignition at a fusion reactor. So this is not a fission nuclear reactor as traditionally, but fusion, which is how the sun powers itself. And that's not looking like it'll happen, but potentially next year in 2027 is the plan for a couple of these private startups to turn on reactors. So I'm a year early is what it's tracking at. Then we had a couple more macro predictions that Republicans hold the House. That's still to be determined later this year. And debt to GDP declines.
The Republican holding the House, we looked at Polymarket, and currently, the Democrats are strongly favored at 83.5 to 16.5.
The betting market doesn't believe it happens. Tech predictions, I predicted that stablecoin transaction volume would exceed that of Swift on a monthly basis. It still has a long, long way to go, but the year's not over, but it's not looking good.
I was trying to figure this out. Was your prediction number of transactions or dollar volume? We'll take either one.
That was 6 months ago.
Either way, you're way behind. So
Mike predicted Tesla Robotaxi weekly rides would exceed that of Waymo. Hasn't happened yet. Still potential for that. I believe Robotaxi is launching or just launched in Austin.
And Miami. But the number of cars is very low. So this is going to require a serious hockey stick at the end of the year to catch up with Waymo.
I did take a Robotaxi ride in Dallas, and it was pretty phenomenal. The novelty wore off 1 minute into the ride, and then I'm worried about what music's playing. And I didn't pay attention to what the car was doing. So next one is a quantum computer cracks a Bitcoin wallet. Hasn't happened yet as far as we know. What has come out, though, is Google produced a bit of research, and let me find my notes on this, but they produced a bit of research that greatly reduced the number of qubits, which are processing components in a quantum computer, greatly reduced the need of the volume of those in order to break a Bitcoin encryption. So that really pulled forward the timeline that Bitcoin could be broken if one of these computers were to be created. It's kind of an exponential growth rate on how powerful we're making quantum computers, obviously starting from a very low bar today, but it's growing rapidly. And then the thought is Google predicted a year, and I think it was 2029, that it might be possible that one of these computers exists that could beat Bitcoin encryption in real time. And what real time means is within the block transaction window, which is, I believe, on average 10 minutes, but sometimes it can take longer. So you have a 10-minute window to beat the encryption, guess the password, and take control of a wallet. But my prediction was more to the effect of a lot of these wallets haven't transacted in a long, long time, and you have a long period of time to try to guess the password to get into it. So that's why it potentially could happen this year. Next one was XAI will have the definitive leading language model.
Currently, that prediction's not going well, but we don't have scores yet for Grok 4.5. If we assume it's near Opus 4.7, that's a good step into being towards the front of the pack. I think the acquisition of Cursor is the big unlock for them. So I'm not going to back down on that one.
How do they have enough capacity since they've leased all that capacity in Memphis? How do they have to Anthropic and Google? Where are they getting the capacity to train a new model?
I don't think they've leased everything. They've leased most of Colossus 1, or all of Colossus 1, and just part of Colossus 2.
Let me ask you another question. Do you think that to be competitive, building a frontier model requires the latest Nvidia chips, or would you be equally able using Hoppers or Blackwells, or rather the latest Nvidia chips?
I think if you wanted to leapfrog your way to the front, you need a very large cluster of latest generation NVIDIA chips.
Yeah, you could probably accomplish all the compute with the prior generation of chips. You're just going to be taking many more months to do it.
And where would the other clusters be in addition to Memphis? And when Anthropic goes to work, I mean, they are a significant Amazon customer, but Amazon's gone slower on NVIDIA chips and prefer their own, or Google for that matter. To have a frontier model that leads the pack, how dependent are you on NVIDIA equipment to do that?
Well, as of right now, we don't know for sure, but our understanding is that Anthropic's being trained on Trainium, so they are overcoming. I mean, that's the best model that's available. So we'll see. The bet on SpaceX is definitely the large coherent cluster and latest hardware. So,
and Anthropic was the first to sign up there. So
exactly,
maybe that they felt they needed that capacity. Okay, so, we're not terribly embarrassed. We're doing okay, Jason. Or have you got some ones where we were really wrong coming up?
No, I think we're not doing bad. So we have a set of healthcare predictions.
Oh, AI legislation. We have one more.
Oh, okay.
So this was one of mine, is that Congress would pass some sort of federal AI legislation. And not that I'm necessarily rooting for this. Ideally, it actually keeps it more competitive. But there is a bill that's being worked on in the House and then one in the Senate. None of them seem to be getting much traction. So we'll see.
So our first healthcare prediction was this year, 2026, would be the largest year for pharma M&A. And so far, we're tracking right on course for that. We've had, I think, close to $150 billion in transactions in the first half of the year. And the interesting thing about that is none of them were these so-called mega deals. I think the biggest was a $13 billion transaction. And most of them are right around the single billions of dollars. So the fact that it's a high volume of smaller transactions is interesting. The number of transactions is definitely outpacing past years.
I think 2019 was the most recent largest year.
Yeah.
And on a run rate basis, the first half, we are well ahead of 2019.
Yeah. And if there is one of these large deals coming in the back half of the year, we'll definitely exceed it. My next prediction was the FDA would ban high fructose corn syrup. And it probably won't happen, but there is some action on that where there's been requests to the FDA to look at the highly processed sugar ingredients added into food. A couple companies have been reformulating products voluntarily removing high fructose corn syrup. So maybe the industry, kind of self-regulates. That would be the ideal scenario, but it's not a definite no, but it's looking like it won't happen. And then my last prediction here was that we would have a functional cure for Parkinson's approved by the end of the year. So if you look at timelines, traditional timelines of clinical trials, that definitely won't happen this year. But the reason I made that prediction was we'll have some extremely compelling phase 2 data come out, be published, and then the FDA might do an accelerated path with the national review voucher and essentially take a 1 month review period and have it be approved by the end of the year. So still not out of the question. Mike predicted that there'd be an agentic AI doctor prescribing medicine. Any news there?
Well, if you remember, I thought that was a novel prediction, and you said, well, that's already happened. So in Utah, there's a pilot program where they're doing refills automatically through using AI. So we had to raise the bar to new prescriptions, which is a much higher bar. As of now, we don't have any.
Yeah, that is a much higher bar.
Yeah.
And then Medicare-for-All that we've been talking about. So no move on that yet.
Well, a little bit. There's in the House, there's HR 3069, which does not have a whole lot of support. And then in the Senate, you have Bernie Sanders' bill that also doesn't have a ton of support. But there's people thinking about this. And I think once the midterm comes around, maybe there's opportunities to work across aisles. Be optimistic about that.
I think what would bring it on would be repo market disarray. Scott Bessent, the new chairman of the Federal Reserve, going to see the Oval Office and saying, we're not going to be able to open capital markets or keep them open unless something happens. We need some type of congressional action, bipartisan action on the deficit. And it just seems to me that the great advantage of installing Medicare for all, whatever their age is, you would scrap the Medicaid program. And I mean, that would, obviously Medicare for all is going to cost more, but the Medicaid program is like $600 billion a year. And why do you need Medicaid if you can do Medicare for all? I know that's a gross oversimplification, but I believe in that so much that it's not likely to happen this year, but I'll predict that next year as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
CMS had maybe a wake-up call for us all this week, and they released their latest estimate for healthcare spending, and the estimate goes out through the year 2034, at which point we'll hit $9 trillion in healthcare spending in the U.S. And that is 21% of the economy. So they still expect it to outpace inflation and be an ever-growing expense for the U.S. citizen.
We got a few more minutes for healthcare news, Jason.
Yeah. It's also, the federal government they launched a Medicare GLP-1 bridge program, which I'm not sure what the bridge part of the program means, but essentially if you're on Medicare Part D, you can receive a GLP-1 prescription for $50 a month. So it's a short term. I think it only runs through the remainder of this calendar year. But 2 years ago, back when these drugs were hitting the market, we did a little bit of analysis to give rough numbers on at what price point does prescribing these through a Medicare or through a government-funded program make sense due to the cost savings that could potentially be realized from having healthier population. And the number we came to is right about $80. So if the government's cost is that they've negotiated with, Eli Lilly and Novo, comes out to less than that, and then the patient bears the $50 burden, maybe this is a net positive, longer term for the country. CAR T therapy. China approved the first CAR T therapy for a solid tumor. So that's kind of a big step in that technology. There's no CAR T cell therapies approved for solid tumors anywhere else. So that's a big step that they were able to do that. And then company-specific news, the big one's Vertex. Vertex had their own large acquisition announced this week. They're acquiring Crinetics, which is a San Diego-based company that we're a little bit familiar with, and they specialize in endocrine disorders. So their pipeline has several drugs, but one has already received FDA approval, and they're in the very early stages of commercializing it. They believe it to be a $1 billion a year blockbuster sales potential, but I think it's still a very small amount of sales today. So it's a $10 billion deal. It's a big deal. They paid a big premium for the company. I tend to believe endocrine companies that are looking at treating endocrine disorders are in a good space. There's been research published that a lot of environmental factors that we deal with, specifically microplastics, is causing a lot of endocrine disorders. So I think that's something that we're only going to see more of in the population and not less of. So being in the space to treat endocrine disorders could be a good place in the future.
Good. I think we finished our predictions. I was thinking we might have to go to a second week, but I think we finished. So we survived another review of predictions, which is good.
And if you want to look at them,
Yeah.
we'll put the link up on the website.
Yeah,
in
not
the
too
email.
many bruises.
No, pretty much unscathed. Everyone, we're running a little over. Thanks for listening. Be well and stay healthy, and we'll be here exactly 7 days from now. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
The views expressed on this podcast are the hosts alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to and no reliance should be placed on the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.